Hi, this is Arthur Carmazzi, best-selling author and currently ranked as one of the world's top 10 thought leaders in leadership and organizational culture. And today we're going to be talking about where's your brain? And specifically, we're going to be looking at what genes in your brain are responsible for your ambiguity relief, or how your brain gets clarity. Now, if you remember in the last video, we talked about the different parts of the brain. We talked about the prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus, and the cingulate cortex. So today we're just going to be focusing on one area and kind of easing you into the whole concept of brain genetics in the first place, just in case you're not a neuroscientist. So, what is basically a gene? It starts with, of course, a chromosome. So you've probably seen this whole little double helix thing that we got up here, okay? And that in itself is a chromosome. That's the whole thing. Now, chromosomes are in every single one of your cells, okay? In case you don't remember your high school biology. Now, if you take one component of that chromosome, that basically makes your genes. Now, each gene, of course, has different information, and that information essentially is part of who you are and why you are the way that you are. Now, let's look at a gene map. Now, you'll notice that a gene map very specifically identifies all these little colored areas, and those represent very specific genes. And, of course, the scientific community has come up with a very cool way of numbering them. Don't worry about it. It's not really that important at this time. But let's look at what is important. Gene alleles. See, the thing is that every gene has different lengths, and the lengths of those genes does affect something different in, could be, for example, as simple as eye color, or as complicated as the amount of specific enzymes released that affect brain process. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, and specifically we're going to be talking about it in the prefrontal cortex. Now, the prefrontal cortex, last time we discussed, is all about planning. It's about inhibition of behaviors. It's about being able to organize your thoughts and more or less problem solving, okay? So we know what the prefrontal cortex is. Now let's look at the genes that affect the prefrontal cortex. So, the COMPT gene. Now, the COMPT gene basically has also different alleles. And different alleles means it produces different amounts of specific enzymes, or in this particular case, one of the enzymes is called catechol-O-methylase. I know it's a big word. Don't worry about it. Basically, let's just call it the MB-COMPT enzyme. So, what does it do? Well, essentially, it regulates dopamine and norepinephrine. Now, you may have heard of dopamine as this like happiness drug. Well, we're going to go into that in a whole different video because that is a big thing in itself. But for now, let's just understand that dopamine and norepinephrine are important neurotransmitters for your brain process or your ambiguity relief. Now, if, for example, you have this particular enzyme, you've got a lot of this and it's regulating, say, more norepinephrine, that means that the more norepinephrine you have, the more heightened your bigger picture is. You're looking at bigger things all around you. Now, it gives you the ability to expand your attention. Now, smaller amounts of norepinephrine basically bring it down. So your attention basically comes down to smaller details or internal things, like even, for example, your internal emotions rather than what's going on everywhere around you. So, that does affect your brain process. Now, besides, of course, the regulation of the dopamine and norepinephrine neurotransmitters, it also affects the other two genes, which are the DRD2 and DRD4 genes, which are basically receptors. Now, receptors are, well, imagine that you're sitting at a chair. Now, that chair is a receptor for your body. Now, if you have lots and lots of chairs to fill, well, and you don't have enough people to come and sit in these chairs, then essentially somebody eventually is going to take away the chairs. On the other hand, if you have lots of people and not enough chairs, eventually somebody's going to bring the chairs. And that's basically how your brain works in a very simple way of looking at it. So the DRD genes are also affecting the number of receptors for these different neurotransmitters, which, of course, affect how your brain interprets and gets clarity of the world around it. So this specifically in the prefrontal cortex, we're dealing with dopamine and norepinephrine only and the receptors that go with it. So in a nutshell, hopefully you've got some kind of an idea of how our brain interprets clarity in the prefrontal cortex. Don't forget, we still have the hippocampus and the cingulate cortex to talk about, but we're going to be talking about that in the next video. This is Arthur Carmazzi wishing you great success.